White as snow, red as blood, and black as ebony. These are the three colours associated with the three phases of a woman's life. In the previous episode, we looked at the masculine configuration, which was red and then white and then black. But the women's ordering is slightly different, starting with the white, moving into the red before, again, ending up at black, the same as the masculine sequence. Today, we're going to explore these three different phases, and we're going to do it through the means of the ancient Greek myth of Crone and Demeter, and Crone, how she becomes the queen of the underworld, Persephone, and how Hades steals her away. So that's what we're going to be exploring, because this archetypal unfoldment is kind of contained within that story. The Crone, Persephone, Demeter myth was the great myth of the Eleusinian mysteries, the famous rites of initiation in the ancient world, which by all accounts were very transformative, and it seems that they used some sort of plant medicine in creating some sort of psychedelic experience, but it was an experience of the underworld and a rebirthing kind of experience that was very powerful and very popular in the ancient world. And the myth that goes with it is of Persephone and her mother Demeter. So Demeter is the fertility goddess. She's the goddess of the crops, and her daughter is Crone, or later becomes Persephone. So Crone is just Greek meaning maiden, and that is the name that goes with the first phase of the women's ordering. So the white phase is the maiden phase, and while Demeter is off looking after the earth, looking after the crops, Crone is playing with the goddesses Artemis and Athena, and she's in a meadow of flowers and just enjoying her childlike life. And then the earth splits open, and out of it comes the dark god Hades, who is the king of the underworld, and he takes her forcefully and brings her back to his kingdom in the underworld. And Demeter then wanders the earth in complete grief and refuses to grow crops, and she's searching about for where Crone has gone, and she searches the earth, and after 10 days she finds Hecate, the goddess of later becomes the goddess of the moon, but she's one of these powerful ancient female goddesses who would have been one of the Titans, which is the generation before Zeus and his lot. So she would have been a sister of Cronus. And Hecate tells her, yes, I heard her call out 10 days ago, but I do not know anymore. And so they go together and they go to Phoebus, the sun god, and they ask him, and he says, well, yeah, it was Hades. He took her down into the underworld with a tip of the hat from Zeus. So Zeus was in, and Zeus knew that Demeter would never let her daughter go, and so knowing that Hades was in love with Crone, he says, just take her. And Demeter is she's furious at this point, and she's distraught, full of grief, and she's just wandering the earth, and she comes to Eleusis, and there's a few events that happen there which explain why it later became the Eleusinian mysteries, and that became the center of the Demeter cult. And she refuses to tend any of the crops, and so the earth falls into famine and disrepair, and Zeus starts to freak out because he doesn't want all the mortals to die, and so he sends Hermes down to the underworld to fetch Crone back and bring her back to her mother so that the earth can restore. But there's a funny part of it, that if she's eaten some of the food of the underworld, then she's doomed to have to stay there or to return there. She cannot be cut free of it. And so Hermes goes down to the underworld and explains the situation to Hades, and Hades says, okay, fine, let her go. But before she does go, he gives her some pomegranate seeds, and she eats them and then returns, and she's joyfully ecstatic in returning to her mother. But then there's this moment of grief and sorrow when they learn that because she's eaten of the food of the underworld, she'll have to return there. And so the story goes, she has to spend 3 months of the year in the underworld with Hades and 9 months of the year above the earth. And so that is it's the explanation for winter, for the seasons, that winter is Demeter's grief over the separation from her daughter, who has become Persephone, queen of the underworld. So at the start of the story, she's Crone, and the end of the story, she's Persephone. And the way this plays out in terms of the ritualistic meaning of it is that Persephone is the grain that sprouts up in spring. It's the thing that's born out of death. It's the queen of the underworld. So there's the death of winter in it, but out of her, she's still the daughter of the fertility goddess. And in later times, she's like the fertility goddess herself. She gets sacrificed to above Demeter. And it's out of her death that something is born. So she's both the death and the rebirth. So it's that crops coming back, the seeds that were planted in the season before, in the autumn before, sprouting in that spring. So it's out of that death comes new life. Persephone has returned to the earth. And then as you move on to August and the crops mature, then it's said that Kore is the seed at the end of season, and it's cut and it's laid in the granaries underground to be stored to feed the community until the next year. And that Kore is the sacrificed one, the one that is cut down and sent into the underworld. So that's a sort of a historical ritualistic reading of it. But there's also the reading that we're interested in, which is the phases of femininity. And with Kore, and we see her playing at the start with Artemis and with Athena, and that's an interesting thing we might explore a little bit later. But initially she's Kore, she's the maiden, she's the white maiden, she's in this meadow, she's playing and she's looking at beautiful flowers, and it's the image of innocence and beauty and youth and the hope of youth. And I guess this is just the woman in her youth. This is the first phase of being a woman, where it's beauty and the sun seems to shine, and the innocence that goes with that first stage of femininity, that women are beautiful and they have this attention coming to them, and all the world can seem like such a friendly and bountiful kind of place. And this is the kind of girl who's very like airheaded, or very just light and fun kind of thing. So it's just that idea of the young woman as maiden, and that's what we're capturing with that white phase of the feminine stage. But then what happens is that Hades, the earth opens up, and then she moves into this second phase, because she's taken, or this is not even that she's moved into the second phase, this is the transformation point, and she gets pulled into the underworld. And this is the phase of a life where that image of innocence and that image of the world as a beautiful and bounteous place that will look after you and will always be friendly, it's where that illusion gets shattered. And I do know many women, really just like beautiful souls, who've experienced horrible things at the hands of men. And I guess it's that red masculinity meeting the white maiden has kind of disastrous results quite often. And so for the maiden at this point, she experiences that the world isn't all it's cracked up to be. It isn't all such a beautiful meadow of flowers, that she gets taken into this underworld. And we can map this over with the story of the Frog Prince, which we explored in an earlier episode, and how the young girl is playing with the golden ball, which, as we see in Iron John as well, is the symbol of wholeness and the fullness of life that we have in youth. And then it goes into the dark well, and this dirty frog has to go and reclaim it for her. And so it's a similar thing of that interaction with the frog, that creature of the underworld, and Hades coming up from the underworld and bringing Kore down. And it's the procession of how Kore becomes Persephone. So this is the phase between the white and the red, and how does such an innocent creature become the kind of powerful thing? Because the woman who is at red is that feisty kind of woman, that woman who a bit more assertiveness, and the red phase is called the mother phase. And you don't have to be a mother for it, but there's that energy that comes with the mother, like that thing of it's a much more assertive kind of woman. I don't know, I have one friend who, she said when she had her son, she would have been quite young at the time, early 20s. She said it transformed her. It changed who she was, and something else awoke in her. And you hear this with parents all the time. It transforms who you are. And so this is what happens with the mother archetype waking up. And it's not just triggered by having a kid. It's something that comes with maturity. Women enter into this second phase, and with that comes the assertiveness, comes the bit more shrewdness and the bit more pushbackness. And we see that much more in our culture today with women. The feminist movement has really brought that along, and really brought women from that innocent, empty vessel kind of phase of white, and brought a lot of women into this red phase, and given them a lot of power. So in the mother phase, the woman becomes more, rather than just being a receptive and empty vessel that has things coming to it, the mother becomes more assertive, but also more caring, more giving, more nurturing. That thing of giving self to other and becoming an active force in the world, and just developing a deeper understanding of how the world works, and becoming intentional in acting in that sphere. So the woman in the red phase is becoming much more conscious and intentional, and creating her world rather than just being being a passive thing that's molded by it. And this is what we see when you see Persephone in the fullness of her power, and you see the way Homer talks about her and the way the different poets talk about her as queen of the underworld. It's a very different thing to that Core that's innocent and it is grieving and it is terrified when Hades takes her into the underworld. She becomes this mighty, noble, powerful queen passing judgment over the souls of the dead, and she really comes into that role and embodies that role, and that's the kind of motherly aspect, that motherly, powerful energy coming through. To relate it to the Frog Prince again, that kind of pluckiness, that kind of more assertive thing is what we see happening in the Frog Prince. So you can see the Frog Prince as the transformation from white into red, and what happens is that the princess, the frog comes to the palace and the king forces her to let her in, and she feeds the frog his dinner, and then he's like, I want to go to your bed with you. And so she brings him up to the bedroom, and in the later version of the myth, which the Brothers Grimm rewrote, she kisses the frog and the frog turns into the prince. But in the first version, in the 1812 version that the Brothers Grimm originally collected, she takes the frog and she chucks it off a wall. She says, no, I'm not letting you into my bed. So she kind of draws a line in the sand, and it's when she throws that frog off the wall that it turns into the prince. So that's how she breaks the spell in the Frog Prince version of the myth. And I think that that's very instructive of, you can see the white, the passive force, it's just the girl at first in the Frog Prince who wants her golden ball back, and whatever, she'll do whatever. And she sees the world as kind of serving her. But then in that transformation point, she's put through the unpleasant things, the frog coming up to the house and having to feed him and having to kind of obey his commands. But then she just draws a line and she throws him off the wall. And I guess this is the white woman becoming the red woman, becoming that, having more assertiveness. And that's how you turn those kind of red knights that the woman is meeting into the white knight, into a more mature version of the masculine, into the prince that is actually a suitable partner for the princess, rather than just a frog, rather than this unpleasant thing coming up from the underworld. And it's that forming a relationship with the unpleasantness and being able to assert yourself, being able to have the certainty of your own ground. And that is what happens with the woman coming into that phase red and embodying that archetype of that mother phase. And at this point, it's worth considering the fact that Core at the start of the story is with Artemis and Athena in the meadow of flowers. They're the people she's playing with. And those are the two virgin goddesses. And Athena was born out of Zeus's head in full armor, and Artemis is the huntress who no man is allowed to see naked. And I think it's Actaeon that does see her, and she turns him into a stag and he's killed by his own hounds. So it's that thing of punishment. So these are the virgin goddesses, and another name for this phase of the Maiden is the Virgin. And it's interesting to consider these two types, the Artemis and the Athena, because they're kind of the tomboys of Greek mythology. They're very much more masculine, and they don't have the feminine sexual traits of the fullness of womanness. So I've been trying to figure this out as to whether they are alternate versions of white, or whether they are a femininity that has bypassed white and gone to red, and so is lacking the femininity. So we looked at this in the episode on the three colors of men, and how you get men, especially in modern times since the 60s and the feminist revolution, you get a lot more men who bypass to white and they skip that red, and they're missing that red energy. And because of that lack that is in them, they end up needing to go back and to fill in that red. And that's where we get things of because the white ends up being ineffectual, that's where we get things like the incel culture and pickup artistry, is attempts for men who are stuck at white, stuck at the moral level, have skipped the red to go back and to complete that red. And so I've been wondering with this Artemis Athena thing, and seeing them with Core at the start of the story, and them being virgin goddesses, whether they are in fact the equivalent of that, whether they are the ones that have bypassed white and gone straight into the redness of, because you think of those traits is that assertiveness and that taking an active role. That's a more masculine energy, and I'm not talking about masculine and associated with men, but just the yin and the yang. It's more that yang energy of assertiveness, especially the Frog Prince throwing that frog off the wall, and Queen Persephone sitting in judgment in the underworld. It's that power that comes with the masculinity, but with the Persephone model, it includes the elements of femininity, includes the whiteness. The redness is built on top of that innocence and that beauty and that whiteness. And it's that it's been enshrouded in a new wisdom and a new strength. Whereas if you look at the Artemis and Athena, are they bypassers? Have they missed out on the white? And you think of the kind of cultural trope of the tomboy girl who finally discovers her femininity, who gets dressed up and people are like, oh wow, she's so beautiful, as well as being all these other amazing things that come with that alternate development of the kind of tomboy. And so yeah, it's just that interesting thing. I'm trying to figure those out, and I think it's that they're missing that white foundation, and so the Artemis and Athena need to go back and fulfill that, perhaps. Well, not to pass judgment on goddesses or anything, but it's the story of Persephone is clearly the straight through line and the way you'd expect this to develop. And so as white passes to red, red must pass into black, and the black is the Crone phase. And Jung kind of talks about the great mother archetype, and how when the archetype moves from the mother onto the grandmother, you get the more archetypally charged version, and how that splits into two things. As on the one hand you've got the wisdom of the great mother, but on the other hand you've got the witchiness. And so this is kind of the way of looking at the Crone, and as Barbara Walker describes the Crone in her book on this archetype, it's the wise, willful, wolfish Crone. And that is a very interesting description. So there's a wisdom that comes with it, because again, this is what's happening with the Crone, is that she's moving away from more that outward attitude. So you see with the white maiden, it's a completely passive attitude to the world, and then with the red mother archetype, it's an active role in the world. But then the black Crone is withdrawing from the world, and she's no longer giving so much power to that. And you can maybe map this over onto Demeter's transformation, and how Demeter, she withdraws from Olympus, she withdraws from the gathering of the gods, and she decides to follow her own willful way, and she will have her own way. And you can see in that it's a grief, as we saw with the Black Knight in the men's sequence, that it's grief, it's woundedness that leads to the second half of life, that leads to the black developing. And as Rumi said, it's the wound that lets the light in, and that seems to be what happens with Demeter here, is that the grief kind of consumes her and transforms her. And if we see Persephone as becoming a sort of fertility goddess later, then Demeter becomes the kind of greater mother, the great mother archetype in a more pure form, and embodying more that Crone energy. And you can also see it in Hecate, who is the moon goddess that tells Demeter what happened, and from then on she becomes a guide, and she is the torchbearer, so guiding Demeter around, and becomes a guide to Persephone as well in the underworld. So she's the torchbearer, and that's another way of looking at the Crone as the guide of other women, as the guide of women through their troubles in life, and the initiator of women. So she's initiating Demeter into Cronehood, and initiates Persephone into the redness of the mother archetype. So you could see the Crone as the facilitator of transformation, or the facilitator of initiation in women's transformational points. And so that really points to the wisdom and to the witchiness. And the witchiness, you could maybe relate to the fact that the Crone becomes more idiosyncratic. This is what happens when we withdraw and we go into our inner world, and we discover our own uniqueness. So rather than matching the mores and morality of the outside world and doing what the superego says we should do, we begin to tap into our own internal conscience and our own inner world, and we begin to live according to that map. And that's what's happening with the Crone, is that she has become more uniquely herself, more idiosyncratic by going into that, by going into her inner world, and that makes her appear unusual outside. And because that inner world of the woman is much more intuitive, and it's got much more of a magical strain running through it than the masculine psyche, that's why you're going to get this kind of thing of the witch. So the wisdom and the witch are not two completely separate things. There is a connectedness there, because she's tapping into her own wisdom, into her own intuition. And this is obviously connected with women coming into menopause, coming into that transformation, and losing the outer beauty, losing that beauty of the maiden, although it's becoming more and more common now. Obviously that in one of the errant evolutions of modern society, that the Crone is not appreciated in the same way that elders among men are not appreciated. The older folks in society, that kind of lost its esteem, which it has in tribal living, that you've got the respect for age, the respect for the elders, and that's kind of gone away. And so it kind of led to a sort of Botox culture in which women are aspiring to continue to look young, to continue to look beautiful forever, and there's a pressure. And I guess it's the leaning into that, it's leaning into the loss, the grief of Demeter, the loss of that youth that leads to the transformation into the crone, leads to the transformation into that wisdom and into that witchiness. And I've seen a lot with like more new age kind of thing. The new age is kind of facilitating this a lot more. And you see, I've met a lot of women who are coming into middle age and they're getting more into spirituality and into crystals and into all the different aspects of kind of spiritual new age kind of thought. And so you see that women becoming more spiritual in that phase, and you can see that thing of the witchiness and the wisdom emerging. And so that's what's happening with the crone there. They become guides to other women. They become guides to recharting the course of the feminine in society. So that would be the crone phase. And as I said in the episode on the masculine pattern, there's neither is better than any of the others. Each of them is a phase of life that must be lived. And as you see with the bypassing maybe of an Artemis and Athena, that they're missing out on the femininity. And so you need the white, you need the red, and ultimately the black is the wisdom that is great for all women. So each of them is necessary for all of women in our society. And I think it's a beautiful thing to include and to have all of that, and especially to reaffirm the value of the crone. We've definitely seen the value of the wise old man being affirmed a lot more, and maybe Jung did a lot for that, but I think there's still the cultural perception with women is that there's less affirmation of the older woman, of the role and the value of that older woman. And so I think it's great to have an eye on this triple pattern of woman's development in order to see and identify and affirm each stage of the woman's journey. So that's everything that I wanted to share on today's episode of The Living Philosophy. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe if you haven't already. And I'd love to hear from you down in the comments if you have any thoughts, insights or feedback. Otherwise, I shall see you next time. Thank you for watching.